It's Thursday and we're going to talk about something potentially controversial. But first, a public service announcement. Bias. You keep using this word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Guys, ease off the accusations of bias. They're very serious. It's not a cute thing you can throw at someone with absolutely zero proof. Bias is an inclination or outlook to present or hold a partial perspective, often accompanied by a refusal to consider the possible merits of alternative points of view. Or as conservative pundits seem to understand it, or I will say internet pundits seem to understand it, where an issue is presented in such a way as to downplay points of view expressed by internet people, I will say. That seems to be the way most people are using the term bias with me as they're leaving angry comments, seeming completely lacking in objectivity themselves by the sheer amount of angries. And it's interesting because I did some research, and the most enduring media bias seems to be, historically, and I'm talking all the way back to the printing press, the media bias most strongly seems to be a lean towards topics that wealthy people care about, which is very interesting. It's not necessarily left-wing. It's not necessarily right-wing. It's class-based. It's wealthy versus middle class or poor people. And I can absolutely see that. So get out of the political binary. Everything is not about right-wing or left-wing. Okay? Okay. Because I want to move into something that is actually something that men's rights activists talk about a lot. The sentencing gap. And how I think it's affecting the rhetoric on this political cycle. And I don't have any empirical evidence for this. This is just a theory. This is just something I think might be interesting to think about, because it is otherwise extremely scary that we have not just a political candidate, but multiple members of a political party gleefully talking about throwing their political opponents in jail when they haven't been charged. They have been investigated, yes, but they have not been charged, nor have they been convicted with a crime. This is a terrifying concept, and it's Banana Republic territory if they actually mean it. And this is where this theory started coming from. I think that these stormtroopers are treating the lock her up in terms of Hillary Clinton as a less serious thing because she's a woman. What? Hear me out. A lot of Trump's support doesn't necessarily come from the alt-right, but it is heavily influenced on the internet by alt-right memes, alt-right tactics. And the reason the alt-right has the presence on the internet it does is they're very good at presenting ideas in simple and fun ways, no matter how otherwise horrific they would be. There's this tendency towards catharsis on the internet where people laugh at horrible things because reasons. But one of the things that is very, very ingrained in the opinions of the non-college educated white working class voters that are Trump's primary core of support, and this part is not my opinion. You can look that up. The fact that Trump's primary support, his strongest base, the only thing he consistently wins in is white working class, non-college educated voters. I don't know. I know it's definitely men. I don't know about women. That one might have changed, but I think women as well. But one thing that those voters are acutely aware of is the sentencing gap. And I isolate them, the gender sentencing gap, I should say. And I isolate them because when we move over to non-white, non-college educated voters, there's a racial element in the mix that seems to be more front of mind there. But this is obviously a concern. Basically, as you see in the headline, men are more likely to go to prison. And if they are sentenced to prison, they are more likely to be sentenced for longer periods. And I will be clear, this is for the same charges, the same types of crimes. So we have a gap here. And it's a very interesting gap. And I think that there is a certain element, because don't forget, this lock her up thing, he does it once. Trump does it once, Trump supporters do it once, then it's a gaffe, right? But the fact that it has become a point of his campaign that they encourage is something very different. You remember back at the convention? Probably not. It seems like ages ago. When Joni Ernst was on stage giving her speech and they started the lock her up thing and she seemed very, very uncomfortable and just sort of waited for them to finish. She didn't encourage it. That's a very different response from someone who is actually goading the crowd on to chant these things. They are making t-shirts that say Hillary for prison. None of this is especially funny, but it takes on a completely different pallor, if you will, if you assume that they don't think it'll actually happen because women don't tend to go to prison. Interesting idea, right? Interesting idea. And difficult to dismiss out of hand. It's possible that this is part of it. I mean, Trump used to be friends with the Clintons. Ivana and Chelsea were friends, are friends. I don't know. Their husbands were friends, are friends. I don't know. Based on Trump's apparent allergy to anything that seems like, actual felony crime. He never met a tax law he didn't want to bend. But things like drug crimes, things like that, he's legitimately against things like drugs. If you can rely on one position that Donald Trump holds, it's his anti-drug standpoint because of his family history. His brother died of substance-related issues. So I can believe he actually means that. I don't believe he means he's going to build a wall. I don't believe he means that he's going to put Hillary Clinton in jail. Because they had a lot more evidence on Bill, and Bill didn't go to jail. Okay? Like, these are all things that go into the thinking, because this constant lock her up thing, this is a tactic at this point. This isn't Trump going off message. This is his message. And I'm hammering this point home because I need to make it clear that this is not just something he did and his campaign has not signed off on. They continue to beat this drum. And if it actually happens, if Trump gets elected, which is a big if but plausible, and he does, hire a special prosecutor, or appoint a special prosecutor, I believe is the correct term, and they happen to charge her with something, and she happens to be convicted of something, I'm sure we can see that this is increasingly a long shot, right? And he keeps using these examples of military men who took a picture of a submarine and sent it to their families. And he keeps bringing up General Petraeus, who deliberately hand-copied classified information into diaries and then shared them with his biographer, who was also his mistress. He keeps referring to these men who actually went to jail to show that the system is rigged. Now, this is a delightful dog whistle to the sentencing gap, isn't it? And this concerns me, and I want to talk about this, hopefully fairly briefly, because the sentencing gap is a very serious issue that should not be used as a toy, right? It is of concern every time you see a gender disparity anywhere. This tendency to treat women as less criminally culpable has been a concern of feminists going back to the Seneca Falls Convention. I have talked about this before. And it's more complicated than it seems at first blush. There's tons of statistics to consider regarding why women don't go to prison as often as men. I mean, it is black women are far more likely to go to jail than white women. Women who seem to conform to feminine gender archetypes, meaning they seem more feminine and more passive and nicer, you know, the whole sweet old lady thing, they're less likely to go to jail than women who aren't gender conforming. And then there's the statistic that the number of children with mothers in prison, that statistic is rising. There's more and more kids out there who have mothers in jail. Now, whether that means that more women are going to prison or the women who go to prison have more kids, I don't know, based on this statistic I've read. And, you know, clearly poverty, we can all agree that rich people have better lawyers and are therefore less likely to go to jail, right? Right. Now, another element of fewer women going to prison, and this is not excusing it, this doesn't explain it completely. I just want to lay out the facts. This is not waving it away, hand waving, as people are calling it. I need to be clearer, I guess, when I'm saying I am presenting this fact. I am not saying what this fact means yet, so chill out. Excuse my frustration. Just, it's so hard to talk about these things when people are looking to jump. Okay? But women are much more likely to be charged with non-violent crimes. So that's part of the reason there's less incarceration of women. Now, that doesn't explain why women don't go to jail as often, even for non-violent crimes. Remember I said it's not an explanation, it's just presenting a fact. Here's the data. And we can say this without bias, that according to a recent study, men on average receive 63% longer prison sentences than women who commit comparable crimes. Women are twice as likely to avoid incarceration if convicted of a crime. 90% of the prison population is male. A statistic does not tell us why. And there are a lot of very complicated reasons. Here are some of the complexities. Police are more likely to target non-whites than whites, who are in turn less likely to be able to afford quality legal counsel. 1 out of every 3 black males born today will be incarcerated during their lifetime, as compared to 1 out of 6 Latino males and 1 out of 17 white males. Almost 1 in 10 black men between the ages of 20 and 34 were in prison. By contrast, the numbers for white men in the same block was roughly 1 in 50. Needless to say, non-whites make up a majority of the more than 2.4 million people living behind bars as of March 2014, a number that is likely to be much higher than 3 million when you take recidivism rates into account. Now, this tells me that the race issue is probably more pressing than the gender issue in prison. Hear me out, not because it's not important. I can hear you screaming even though you're not here. The ultimate goal, we can assume, is to get the overall number of people in prison down. So the solution is not to lock up more women and more white people. Prison rehabilitation isn't terribly effective. The recidivism rates are through the roof because going to prison above and beyond doing your time carries a social stigma. But, 1 out of 3 black males will go to jail during their lives. That's a huge statistic. And if we're going to triage this issue, we start there. And as much as people want to complain that, but men, there is a serious race problem in prisons as well. That's undeniable. Notice I say as well. Okay? They're both problems. And this is where this article blames the prison industrial complex, the privatization of prisons combined with tighter drug laws. Now, drug laws are part of the equation. I don't think it's all of the equation. I mean, if you watch a show like Orange is the New Black, again, bringing it up, the lead is a fairly well-off white girl. Right? And the whole process of going into prison seems very clean and very civil, and she gets to say goodbye to her family, and she turns herself in voluntarily, and all this stuff. And media like this skews public perception. In this case, you can say bias is public perception. Because look, here's a show about a white woman in prison. A white, upper middle class white woman in prison. And we see these examples of what's called the evil woman syndrome, the media's obsession with people like Martha Stewart who defy this gender gap and go to prison. It's this huge thing, even though, what Martha Stewart did wasn't very exciting. And it's medium security at best. That's what was so hilarious about Suits recently, that the one character, who I just call Our Man now because it's the same actor, and being Our Man is just cool, but he's going to this hardcore prison where there's all this violence and police informants and stuff like that for a white collar crime. He lied about being a lawyer. That's all. You don't get sent to maximum security for that. It was foolish. And this is how the media warps these issues, because the statistics don't match the stories that people are exposed to, right? It's interesting how shows like Empire handles it, because that's very controversial within with some community activists I've talked to. They say that people are really divided on Empire because they don't think that society is far enough along to show basically black people with flaws, like real flaws. And that's one of the things I find so compelling about the show. It's like, man, it's like the Black Dallas, except going to jail is actually a relevant thing, you know, as opposed to people just getting put in jail as a plot point, and they don't suffer any ill effects. Because, and of course they don't. They have money and can go work at family companies. They don't have to worry about the reality that most companies won't hire ex-cons, right? And this is the interesting part in the article, and this is where I want to come in for a landing here. A lot of times these issues, meaning, you know, as they call it, the industrial problem of the prison industrial complex, encompassing state corruption, capitalism run amok, race, and when it comes to the heavier sentencing for men, gender inequality. So why isn't the last issue receiving more attention? A lot of times these issues will get drowned out because of highly public fighting between men's rights activists and feminists, which winds up overshadowing the legitimate concerns that many MRAs have. And of course, this is an MRA saying this. The sentencing gap should not be a large issue. It should be a large issue not only for men's rights activists, but for feminists. It is a clear example of how our justice system treats women as if they have less agency and are thus less accountable for their actions. Yes, that is 100% true. And this goes back, and this is one of the fascinating, troubling elements of what the suffragettes did in England. They used the fact that people are more uncomfortable with women being in prison to game the system. There was a revolving door in and out of jail with the suffragettes. And I'm not going to get into that here, but they gamed this system because their goal wasn't complete and total equality between the sexes. We weren't even there yet. Their goal was to get the voting franchise for women and certain workers' rights and the ability of women to keep the money they earn, things like that. But they had very specific goals. And so you hear some men's rights activists using the tactics of the suffragettes, which absolutely 100% played on gender stereotypes, to quote-unquote prove that feminism is not really about equality. It's a misleading argument. These things are incremental. And that was in England. Over in America, the Quakers that made up the bulk of the attendees to the first ever American Feminist Conference, the Seneca Falls Convention, we're talking about the fact that women didn't want to be seen as less morally culpable than their husbands because that meant they weren't seen as full people. And you get into this interesting gilded cage that's constructed for white women and was at the time, but you still see here. And every time it happens to me, it drives me crazy. And the woman who historically talked about this and really brought it originally to the attention and then kind of disappeared from popular awareness until researchers and journalists like Gloria Steinem helped bring back the awareness of this particular figure is a woman named Sojourner Truth. And she did a speech called Ain't I a Woman? That talked about the fact, and Sojourner Truth was a black woman, but she talked about the fact that white men treated black women as completely capable of manual labor and walking over their own damn mud puddles and getting out of their own damn carriages, while treating women who were white as assumptively incapable of all these tasks. And this continues today, and it affects this prison debate. Conventional assumption is that women can't hack it in prison, whether because they need to raise families or are too emotionally frail or literally lack the physical strength to survive behind bars. Within this zeitgeist, a man who steps up and takes prison time for a woman can be depicted as chivalrous and noble. Inversely, a man who expected a woman to do the same thing would be seen as dishonorable and cowardly. And I'm going to bring us back to where we began examining this topic. On the other thing Donald Trump seems to delight in regarding Hillary Clinton, attacks on her stamina. And I don't think we can disregard the connection between his attempts to paint her as so frail she can't make it through a debate and she has to go home and sleep midday while campaigning. These are things he said. He said she ran out of gas after the second debate, and then she came back and skunked him again in the third one. And according to polls, who said she won, this is not just my opinion, settle down. So he's playing the frail woman card. He is. It's undeniable. He is. This stamina thing, she had pneumonia. There's no evidence. Yes, she has a lighter campaign schedule, but I think that's more that her own campaign team can't stand her some days. I think they have just so embraced this she's an unlikable candidate that she's like, no, let's hide her away because, she may say something that we'll have to deal with next. So we'll use our surrogates who are much more popular and can say more because they're not running for president. That's what I think it is. I don't think it has anything to do with her physicality. And I don't think that if it was a guy running, that, because Trump is instinctually vicious about these things. He goes for the easiest lie. And so the easiest lie, if she had been a man, would not have been that she was frail. Because you take a look at a lot of politicians, they're usually tall and broad-shouldered and very healthy and, so it's hard to make that case. They didn't even try that, they hinted at Reagan's age and they tried to hint at McCain's age. That's why McCain produced so many medical records, but it would be very difficult for Trump to make that case because he's a year older than Clinton. I think Trump would go after a man as lazy. And this is the same dichotomy that affects prison sentencing. Based on a book, I wish I remember the name of it, but I read this great book a while back that dealt with, it was predominantly African-American women they studied. And I apologize for not having the name of this book, guys. I read a lot, and so it can sometimes blur together. But they talked about the fact that the way women, notably black women in this case, are handled by the prison system, they're not treated like they did something bad. Like they did something, they made a choice, and it was the wrong choice, and there are consequences for that choice. That's the way men are treated in our system. What they found with black inmates is that they were treated as if they somehow had some hardwired weakness of character that, oh, poor them, they just can't help themselves. It really focused on weakness with female inmates, as opposed to more, you made a bad choice and this is the consequence of that choice, right? Similarly, Clinton is just weak. She lacks stamina. She needs to go home and sleep. Oh, she needs to be held. I mean, the condescension in Trump's voice, it's mockery. And any other candidate wouldn't be allowed to do that, but he's Donald Trump. So, and she's Hillary Clinton. I mean, that is half the thing. If she wasn't so disliked, that would backfire. It backfired on the press when they went after Sarah Palin for the cost of her clothes. Not as much as I think it should have, but it did backfire. People went, hey, wait a minute, is this relevant? Is it relevant how much she pays for clothes when we expect her to dress nicely, right? But the 1-2 punch of she's weak and frail and lacks stamina, and the chance to lock her up. And as this points out, surviving behind bars requires physical stamina. There's a disconnect here. And I think it's important to recognize this disconnect without bias. Now, this could just be he pulled some stuff out of a hat and it worked with the crowd, so he kept doing both these things. But then we have to ask, did his campaign team, with operators like Roger Ailes, Roger Stone, and Steve Bannon, did they have a better sense of the dynamics involved here, of the dog whistles he was blowing, the things he was tapping into? And the very reason it works is because the crowds have this inherent bias. Keep in mind his crowds contain a lot of older people. That does not mean all Trump supporters are old men. Calm down. There are young Trump supporters because, as Michael Moore put it, it's a huge screw you to the establishment. He didn't use the word screw, but I'm trying to be more polite here. But a lot of older people do have that. Women are, they're the old ball and chain generation. They right to the moon, Alice, they do have these unindividualized, ingrained biases about men and women. And then people start flinging statistics at me about, oh, men are physically stronger, men are this, men are that. Well, yeah, but all those physical benefits go, step to the side. First, based on an individual basis, you see some of these female athletes, they'll kick most guys' butts, right? You want to get in the ring with Ronda Rousey? She's somebody, she is the poster child for individualism. Most men could not beat her physically. You look at the female competitors on American Ninja Warrior. They have to do the exact same courses as the men. And fewer women get through, but some do. They can't. There are individuals that can do it. And so these assumptions we make about people, and it happens to me all the time. A guy who is, I've had guys who are shorter than me and way less than me tell me that it's not safe for me to go somewhere they're going. It's not they're bad people. It's not that they're sexist. They're trying to be nice. Right? And you point it out, and there's sort of a moment of, yeah. But what's interesting is after that, yeah, the paradigm doesn't change. They're still not comfortable letting a woman into a dangerous situation that they themselves are willing to risk. And the condescending thing there is that they are deciding for themselves to take that risk. They are deciding for me that I am not capable of taking that risk. And they don't understand that element. But in real terms, it is there. They're making a choice for me that I am not as capable as them as assuming that risk. And that is a gendered assumption that is all through our society. And it's very unpopular to try to theorize, try to examine, try to look at these cases and go, could this be at play here? And again, I'm not saying it is. This is food for thought, okay? Maybe that's how I need to start tagging these segments. Like, these are just theoretical exercises, okay? The point here is to just consider the theory. Because there is something to it. the way when you combine these things together, when you take a big picture approach to the cumulative nature of all the political attacks coming against Clinton to the Trump campaign, they are all relying on these gender gaps, both, perceptive and systemic. And what all this does, going back to this weaker sex fallacy, because, and I say weaker sex fallacy, I'm not saying that men aren't on average taller, aren't on average physically stronger. What I am saying is that is irrelevant to most modern jobs. On a construction site, or perhaps even as a firefighter, there needs to be a basic level of physical strength. But computer programming does not require any of this, right? Politics doesn't even require any of this. But perceptions of leadership do, because leaders are connected to toughness and strength and accountability. And while I agree that right here and now, the fact that too many men are going to prison and it doesn't do a damn bit of good, the long-term presumptive impacts on women are just as severe. And this is why when we do these things, this is why the feminist MRA divide is so destructive. And why the fixation on calling out personalities and just trying to make the other side look bad instead of making your case. These personality politics, they're destructive. Because the idea of prison is surrounded on this concept of innocent until proven guilty, which Trump is violating, and I really do believe that's because he doesn't think she's ever going to go to jail. That's why I believe that, because that is the less horrible of the two options. And that was a tough one to decide, let me tell you. But instead of taking, say, this issue, or say the suicide rates, the issues that we can actually find consensus on and get to work. Because like I said, I don't believe that the solution is throwing more women in prison. Because it's not working for the men, right? Why ruin more lives? We need to look at sane drug laws. By that, I don't mean legalize everything. It's just, it's possible that financial fines would be a bigger deterrent for people than jail time, because it's like parking tickets, right? A lot of people just, yeah, okay, I did it. I'll pay this. Whereas you want to put me in jail for smoking a joint? I'm going to fight this. Right? I mean, when you get a parking ticket, it's usually, most people are like, okay, I'm not going to do that again. It's not worth the money. But prison is so huge. It's hard to imagine for a lot of people that something that seems so harmless like smoking a joint can actually land you in jail for a fairly long time. And so instead of recognizing that, hey, if we fine people for nonviolent drug offenses, that's money coming into the system. That can actually repay court costs and things like this. And yes, that is a greater hardship on poor people than it is on rich people. So tie it to income. Set the fines based on, percentage of yearly earnings. Make it fair. Make it an equal punishment for everybody. It has to sting as much for a rich person as a poor person, or rich people are just going to keep doing it. Hate to break it to you, folks, rich people are engaging in drug crimes anyway. They're just not getting caught, and they're certainly not going to jail. The number of drugs at overwhelmingly white entertainment parties, even tech parties, is off the damn charts. I hate it. I can't stand that everybody complains about dancing girls at a party, but I have to watch people swapping drugs and getting high, and no one complains about that. The pot all over the place, which I happen to be allergic to. If you complain about that, you're a square, even though that's actually against a law and a short skirt isn't. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But these are the double standards. These are the actual biases we have to confront. These are actual bias. But the men's rights personalities and the loud feminists, the rad femmes, you get all the attention because the men's rights groups go after them to show, look how stupid the whole movement is. This is not keeping one man out of jail, and this is not developing one additional female leader. It is a waste of everyone's time, and it is a painful, exhausting waste of everyone's time. And this is why I am so big on respect and civility. You can disagree with everything I say. Don't name call. Why? Because that doesn't solve the problem. Name calling just tells me that the person doing the name calling is more invested in scoring points and getting cheers from their fans than they are in actually solving the problem. Because you know how you solve problems? You reach across the table and work with people that you may not necessarily like, but you see that they have influence in their respective movement, and they might actually have something to say on this given point. And men's rights activists do have something to say about the prison issue. There are far too many men in prison for things that really shouldn't involve prison, because we're still peeling away from... This is too complicated a history lesson to get into. This video is already too long. But these are the things that really aggravate me about these issues. We could have a united front on this if both sides didn't see working with, if feminists didn't see working with MRAs and MRAs didn't see working with feminists as the equivalent of doing a deal with the devil. And I'll say again, we don't have to like each other. We do have to work with each other to solve these common problems, to keep people out of jail, to keep guys from blowing their heads off, to stop, that teenage girl from overdosing on pills, to all these things. We can save lives. We can preserve quality of life together. And instead, what are we doing? We're flinging nasty grams at each other on the internet. This is ridiculous. All these people who claim to be skeptics and rationalists and all these things on both sides, they take this false scientific approach. There's nothing scientific about their approach. They want that temporary loss of sadness that comes with getting angry enough to insult the other person. Social work this way is not about your trauma. It's about using the shitty things that happen to you to make the world less shitty for other people, because you understand firsthand the shittiness. That's what it's about. But that's not what we're doing. And I can't solve this problem on my own. I can just say I'm not going to be a part of it. I am not going to engage in the name calling, and I am not going to passively sit by and let it happen, and I am not going to give passive approval to the stupid call-outs and the stupid running people down and the personal attacks and all that stuff, instead of getting to work and solving these issues. And the thing is, it's easy to call someone a name. It's easy to go, oh, look at this stupid thing this person said. Oh, how can we take any? I can't believe they went there, which is what I hear over and over and over again. Why can't you believe the person went there? What is the problem with what they did? Don't assume your audience knows. That's a weak argument. Roll up your sleeves and get to doing the hard work. But that's the point. It's hard. But the hard work is the worthwhile work. And people adding to the invective, this is not a neutral activity. Well, you're calling somebody stupid and you're just being a bully, which is behavior that people on both sides engage on far too regularly. People are still getting hurt, people are still going to jail, people are still committing suicide, and getting into who it happens more to, or who attempts versus who goes, and all this, it doesn't matter. There are too many people in prison, and there are too many people taking their own lives, period. Let's get to work. And let's set aside these petty personal disagreements, and that means stop insulting each other, stop looking for ways to attack, stop going through people's Twitter feeds for finding that one inadvisable tweet and spreading it all over the place. This is not saving anybody. This is not furthering your cause. This is making you look like a bully. Stop it. Because these people in prison, these people who take their own lives, it is because they don't feel like they have hope. People get involved in gangs, people get involved in drugs because for one reason or another, it is the best option they have at that moment. And that's just when you drill down into this stuff. And I say this as people who work with street youth, with, these issues that Trump seems to care about, the so-called inner cities. It goes way beyond the inner cities, guys. There are scars based on trauma related to poverty and race and class and all that stuff. They run deep. And the unfortunate thing is that the solutions, short-term solutions, they know them. They know what they are. They know what works, especially with suicide prevention. Problem is they're currently unpopular. They're bad politics. And instead of dealing with facts and instead of looking at what works and what doesn't, politicians go, oh, what will my donors say? If I take up this issue, my donors won't give me money anymore. Is that solving the problem? No, but it's solving their problem, which is re-election. And that's something we should be taking a good hard look at. Money and politics. Because we can't solve any of this stuff until we change the paradigm where 8 millionaires dumping tens of millions of dollars into elections, and 8 is just a number I pulled out of my head. I'm not sure it's 8, but guys like the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson and these Silicon Valley tech billionaires that are dumping a lot of money into both sides, mostly Democratic causes, but then we have Peter Thiel. Politics is all about appealing to those 8 guys. And the big donors are, I don't know of any major female donors. But it's all about appealing to them. That's what it's really about. And the longer we sit here and fight, and the longer we tear each other down, and the longer we resort to invective and name calling and petty, immature tactics, the more that paradigm persists, the more the billionaires, the 0.05%ers, determine for the rest of us the basic contours of the course of our lives. It's up to you. Do you want to perpetuate that? I don't.